Welcome back. Oh, the Chinese knockoffs. They provide us so much great material for memes. However, while we in the US have been weakening our patent protection, China has been strengthening theirs. And when I say weakening, I'm not referring to the great intellect of my home state of Florida, Senator Marco Rubio, who wants to exclude Huawei from any patent protection in the United States. Ah, the irony. I bet Castro is smiling in his grave. When business execs contemplate entering China, they often believe filing for patents would be a waste of time and try to make as much money as they can before they are inevitably screwed. Yet, what China has been doing recently in terms of intellectual property protection is really quite remarkable. We may be getting more than we asked for, since China is now making IP protection a key part of its industrial policy. China's patent offices are now larger than all of the other offices in the world combined. China's not just filing patents, it is implementing advanced technology to power its economy. Take AI, for instance. AI impacts about 26.5% of China's GDP. In the US, it's about half that. In terms of analyzing China's protection of IP, we have some pretty solid data since China publishes the results of its court cases online. One particular dataset is making the analytical side of my brain go wild. Out of about 470,000 cases for patent litigation, foreigners won roughly 84% of the time. Chinese won 80% of the time. Foreigners have greater success rates than Chinese do? What's even more crazy is that an American has a greater success rate for suing for patent infringement in China, about 84%, than he or she would in the US, about 50 to 60%. In 2015, an IP court in Beijing boasted that foreigners won every IP case they brought. Furthermore, injunctive relief in China is now about 90%. Courts in the US don't seem to be too fond of injunctive relief. Hold up, what's injunctive relief? Injunctive relief is a court order requiring a person or entity to do or to refrain from doing a specified act. We have heard so often that China offers no IP protection for companies that has become ingrained into our minds. Yet, China's recent actions towards IP provides a counter-narrative. It's a bit difficult to determine whether these narratives can coexist or if they're in opposition. When we think about IP in China, we have this false assumption that foreigners are dominating the space. We are not. Only 1.2% of patent litigation in China involves a foreigner. And this is a declining percentage. A declining percentage in the most litigious country for intellectual patents. Litigation in the US involving foreigners is about 20 to 30%. It's also important to note that in the US, about 52% of patents filed come from foreigners. In China, it's about 15%. China is a much more domestically oriented ecosystem. The media states that we have been dealing with China on IP infringement for decades. The reality is that our government officials really couldn't be bothered with it before China actually showed potential that it could pull away from the US in key areas. Trademark issues and counterfeits of luxury goods were a greater priority than the development of China's industrial policies. Before Trump, we brought only one WTO case towards China. It didn't even have to deal with IP. So, action towards China in order to acknowledge IP issues was long overdue. The questions that are raised now are, 1. Are we missing this opportunity to address actual concerns with IP in China? And 2, is this IP rhetoric against China a pretext for an even bigger issue that DC has with China? We hear an awful lot of talk about containment and rollback when it comes to China. This is not all that helpful. Our leaders seem to not be making the effort to really understand what progress China has made in addressing IP. The Section 301 report issued by the USTR could have made strong cases against China for discriminating against foreign applicants in the issuance of patents in core tech. Who cares if you have an amazing patent protection if there are unfair hurdles to obtain one? Yet, the report does not address this. Furthermore, the report didn't really push back on China on poor practices for the licensing of technology. Yet, instead it grasps at straws in trying to make its case. The report mentions forced technology several times. Do you believe sophisticated multinational companies were coerced to hand over sensitive information? Whatever information they gave to Chinese firms was given on their own accord. We have heard that China is stealing between $200 to $600 billion worth of intellectual property each year. This has been a stat that's been thrown around for many years. Government officials like using it because it vilifies China and gets people riled up. It defines China as the scapegoat for many of our own domestic problems. But is it accurate? Professor Stephen Roach questions the validity of these figures. He states,
"The figures rest on flimsy evidence derived from dubious proxy modeling that attempts to value stolen trade secrets via nefarious activities such as narcotics trafficking, corruption, occupational fraud, and illicit financial flows. The Chinese piece of this alleged theft comes from U.S. Customs and Border Patrol data, which reported $1.35 billion in seizures of total counterfeit and pirated goods back in 2015. Equally dubious models extrapolate this tiny sum into an aggregate guesstimate for the U.S. and impute 87% of the total to China, 52% to the mainland, and 35% to Hong Kong.
When I founded my company in China a few years ago, I believed that filing for patents in China would not be all that helpful. For that time period, I still believe this was true. 5 years ago is a lifetime in China. I saw patents helpful in terms of raising investment, but I didn't see them enforceable. I believed focusing on trade secrets was a better way for a company to protect its IP, especially since in many ways, patent applications in China require one to disclose a lot more details about the invention. I thought, what's the point of filing a patent? You're advertising details of your invention without the ability to enforce the patent. If I were founding the company in 2019, though, my thoughts would be quite different. So how has this all been changing so quickly? In 2014, China established 3 courts in Beijing, Shanghai, and Guangzhou, devoted specifically to handling intellectual property cases. Since then, cities such as Nanjing, Suzhou, Fuzhou, and 13 other cities have launched specialized IP tribunals that provide exclusive IP jurisdiction within the intermediate courts. In January of this year, China established a specialized appeals court for intellectual property as part of its Supreme Court. The progress they have made is extremely important and will have repercussions in the future. Damon Mateo, CEO of Fulcrum Strategy, states,
"If you rewind history to AIA, that was a highly politicized event, and that was here in the United States. And my guess would be the very same interests who pushed so hard for Congress to reduce the scope of patent protection and reduce 284 damages will be the very same people who are banging on Congress's doors 5 years from now and saying, 'What did you do to us?' Or, 'The Chinese are eating our lunch,' because one of the scanty advantages U.S. companies would have been a huge repository of patents to use as ammunition here in the United States."
Our current dialogue about IP in China doesn't allow room for the possibility that China is becoming an intellectual property powerhouse. It's time to look at China critically, honestly, and strategically. Vilification may feel good, but does it get us to where we want to be? Unless you're on the Pentagon's payroll, the answer is no. I would like to state that one can't have a conversation about IP development in China without Mark Cohen. A good portion of today's talk came through either his previous talks or his blog at chinaipr.com, which I urge you to visit and read. Thank you for listening today. If you found today's talk to be informative, please subscribe and hit the bell.